You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Welcome into another Three-Mod Pod. I am John Kurtz, joined by a lively bunch today. Derek Young from K-State Online, Cole Manbeck, former beat writer for the Manhattan Mercury, who is, you can call it his flu game today. I had one of these recently, but Cole, ahead of the Kansas game coming up tomorrow, is a little bit under the weather. So let's all make sure that we boost Cole's spirits here as we get ready for Kansas. I don't know if he's going to have anything in the tank for some spirits tomorrow, but if he did, I'm sure he would want it to be some Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon or 360 vodka from Holiday Distillery. Shout out to Holiday Distillery, great K-State folks. You know where their allegiances are going to be in the KU game coming up tomorrow, but we appreciate their support of this podcast. So make sure that if you are getting ready for the game, I know it's early, 6 o'clock, so you might have to sneak it in at work. But get your 360 vodka, get your Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon, and make sure to give it a shot. Support those that support us. Unfortunately, K-State will be limping in a bit after taking it on the chin in Fort Worth. Double-digit loss to the Horned Frogs that TCU controlled from start to finish and led by as many as 25 in the game. It was just not K-State's night. Looked completely out of sync. As frustrating as the Butler game was earlier this year, I think this was even more so and felt like a more the thing about this one was that it was just so staggering because we had seen K-State, particularly Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson, play so well throughout the start of Big 12 play and jumping out to the 4-0 start. And they just didn't have it. Didn't have it at all until Marquise Noel got a little bit going there at the end of the game. But I'm not sure that there was really one thing that looked totally in sync from the word go there. It was one of those nights that's going to get you when you're playing a team like TCU that is a top 25 team on the road.
When you play like that in the Big 12, you probably are going to get blown out, and you probably have a hard time getting back into the game as well. And that's what happened with Kansas State. They just turned the ball over way too much. A lot of live ball turnovers, and people are going to look at Kansas State's defense and be like, look at all these layups that they allowed, the field goal percentage that they allowed, even though TCU came out of the game pretty cold. And that's why Kansas State hung around for about 10 minutes. It was because TCU wasn't making any shots. But when you have that many live ball turnovers, like Jerome Tang said, then you kind of run into a problem where your defense he has no chance. And that's why they had so many of the layups they did. But I will say, and I know we'll probably touch on it later, when you're playing this many tough games night in and night out, and that's the case in the Big 12, I think everybody's bound for this kind of performance. It's probably going to happen 2 or 3 times this year. You hope that you can mitigate it a little bit to where it doesn't get out of hand as much as it did in Fort Worth. But I think this is just a product of playing in the Big 12 sometimes. And look, it was a really tough spot too. I know Cole said it in our group chat, so I'm sure he'll touch on it as well. But it's on the heels of 4 straight Big 12 wins, which is very rare, very tough to do. 2 of those being road games at Texas and Baylor, which caught everybody's attention from a national perspective. And then you got the KU game in front of that right afterwards at home, which is going to be one of the most highly anticipated crowds and probably Bramlage Coliseum history. So I think it was a rough spot to be in for the Wildcats too.
Yeah, man, I felt like things just snowballed in the game. They got out to the 11-6 lead, and then the flurry of turnovers hit in case they just couldn't take care of the ball. And they all led. I mean, the majority of them led to points in transition for TCU, where K-State couldn't get back. And that's what TCU thrives on. They're the top team in the country in transition points, and they get 32 points off their fast break against Kansas State to K-State's 13 points. And, 15 steals for TCU. 26 points off of turnovers. So, that they converted, and then second chance points. We knew that was going to be a big point of emphasis. TCU was the number 2 team in the Big 12 in offensive rebounding percentage coming to the game, and they converted their offensive rebounds into points. They scored 20 points on second chance. K-State only scored 8, despite having just 1 less offensive rebound than TCU. So really this boiled down to turnovers leading to easy baskets and not being able to set your defense against TCU. And then they really got going after that. And TCU is a really good team, and they're fun to watch, and they're athletic, they're deep, they've got length, and they get out and run. And they don't, like Jerome Tang said, they don't run a lot of offensive sets. Their whole goal, if you watch them in games this year, they just want to get out and run and transition. And when Mike Miles and Damian Bowe get their heads down and go to the rim, they're very hard to stop. And obviously, when you let them get out in transition, it becomes even more difficult. So it was a really tough situational spot, like DY said, with the KU game. coming up on the heels of that. And also, it's hard to ask for 3 straight top 25 road wins in this league. And we've seen Baylor now bounce back after K-State beat them. Baylor's really good. Texas is really good. And K-State already secured those victories on the road. I just didn't feel like it was all that likely or realistic that K-State was going to rattle off a 5th straight Big 12 win in that spot. Is it frustrating that it became a blowout and got out of hand? Sure. But if you're going to have an off game, I think everyone would rather it happen against TCU than Tuesday night against KU.
Yeah, and TCU an 18-point blown lead against Texas, by the way, from being 4-1 in the Big 12 too. So I mean, yeah, TCU, or I guess it'd be 5-1 in the Big 12. TCU is a very good team, no doubt about that. And yes, to me, I mean, it was just the concerning thing was how it totally got away from them because I mean they couldn't buy a basket. They turned it over 20 times. There were 36 turnovers in total last week. I mean, they had 16 of them against Oklahoma State as well. So I guess, my concern here would be they weren't exactly sharp offensively for most of the game against Oklahoma State either. Capped it off in a really fun way and found a way to grind it out and win the game. But is this the team coming back down to earth a little bit? I think is the real question here when a lot of people had thoughts of, all right, they can maybe compete in the top 3 or 4 of this league after the start that they got off to. I think that would be my question mark. Is there something really truly off with Noel and Keontae Johnson, who in particular were leading the charge and turning the ball over, as you might expect in the first half, because they just had the ball in their hands so much. But that to me is looking at like, okay, can we write that off as a one-off, or was last week kind of the start of a downward trend? I think is the question to me right now.
I don't think it's a downward trend. I think, against Oklahoma State, you're getting defended at the rim so well because that's what they do so well. And against TCU, you just cough the ball up way too much to ever really give yourself a chance not only to set your defense, but to really set your offense, right? I mean, we can complain about the foul situation all we want, and that was probably a real component of Saturday's game. TCU didn't whistle for the first foul until there was 4 minutes left in the first half, which is pretty hard to do, nearly impossible. But at the same time, Kansas State's possessions were lasting 5 to 10 seconds because they were just turning it over at such a breakneck pace. So there wasn't a ton to complain about in that regard. So I guess I see it as a little bit of a one-off. The shooting cooled down and was always going to. That would have been a pretty torrid pace to maintain from start to finish in Big 12 play. But even without that, they can be a good team if they just take care of the basketball.
Yeah, I wouldn't make too much of it. Look, Keontae had 7 turnovers. Marquise had 6. It actually felt like more than that, but obviously TCU was locked in on them. 13 turnovers combined between the two. But I don't know. Like K-State didn't get a lot from their other guys in this game either, and that becomes a key component of this. They have to have other guys, the role guys, step up. Look, if I'm going to take one thing encouraging from it, guys, I thought Tyke Green maybe got a little confidence. I know it was mostly mop-up time, but he scores 11 points, and I thought he looked more confident out there. And maybe they made it a point of emphasis after the Oklahoma State game to have Tyke Green do the post-game radio with Wyatt and Stan. I feel like they're trying to get his confidence up and get him going as well, because they need more from the bench. And Desi gives you 5. You need more there. But yeah, I don't think it's something to be overly concerned about. I think Naquan Tomlin will start to give them more as well. He had 8 points and 10 rebounds in that game. What I do worry about, though, is some teams. I think Oklahoma State threw a triangle. Did they throw a triangle into at K-State, or was it Baylor? DY? Baylor. As I think about the KU game, for example, and John.
Bill Self is sitting there like, all right, what junk defenses can I throw out here? Because he's pretty good.
Yeah, that's where my fear comes, right? Is he going to throw a box and 1 or a triangle and 2 at Keontae and Noel and put Dewan Harris manned up on Noel, who's a good defender, and then also Kevin McCullough on Keontae Johnson, who's one of the top 5 defensive players in defensive rating coming back from last season in terms of returning college basketball players across the country. So they've got the size and the matchups to match up with K-State if we look ahead to that KU game. And that's where I do worry a little bit. If you don't start to get consistently more from your role guys, teams doing stuff like that and taking away Keontae and Noel or one or the other. And the reason this game got so out of hand against TCU is just both of them had an off game at the same time. And I know you look at the final stats and see what Keontae had 18 and Noel had 16, but we know that they didn't play up to their standard, and they both were off in that game. And that's what you can't have happen. You can't have both of them have a down game at once.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think when you kind of get into it, yes, you need more from your bench, but your bench should never be expected to really carry that much of a load. Like, for instance, Kansas is not a deep team either, if you think about it. You go up and down into what they're doing minutes-wise, and in some cases it's more than K-State for a few of their starters. If Grady Dick and Jalen Wilson both play bad, Kansas is going to lose. They don't have enough of a bench to overcome that either. Kansas State is not unique to this. The problem for K-State is they can't have both Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel both play subpar. One of them has to bring it at least every game. Part of that is because the bench isn't really producing at a high enough clip, but there's not too many benches in the country, maybe not any, that can make up for that loss of production.
And I think, too, as it relates to the role guys, it felt to me like just within the context of that game, when especially Marquise, like it'd be one thing if Keontae were just having an off game, but when Marquise is having an off game, nothing's in sync, right? And like nobody has any confidence. And he's the guy that is typically the floor general, knowing exactly where to distribute it, how to set guys up. And it just felt kind of like a chicken with its head cut off running around with him struggling the way that it was. Guys taking some bad shots. I mean, there was a Desi 3 that I can remember being very frustrated by. Guys like Cam Carter, I think, just function a lot better offensively when Marquise Noel is really dialed in on and has confidence and is moving the ball. So I think some of it is like, chicken or the egg, but all of it comes back to, yes, they're very heavily reliant on those two, especially when one of them is a point guard like Noel. You can't really suffer an off night like that from him and expect to win.
Yeah, and they already showed against Oklahoma State they can win without one of them playing well. That was Keontae Johnson, so he's kind of in a 2-game little bit of a funk right now, I would say. So maybe he bounces back and lights it up against KU. We'll have to see if that comes to pass. But they can win and beat good teams. I think Oklahoma State's a good team without Keontae Johnson playing well, as long as Noel is right there with him. It'll be interesting to see, because it's going to happen, and I know it sucks, but what happens when Noel doesn't play well, but Keontae Johnson does? Does Kansas State are they still able to win with that formula? Because we haven't seen that formula. I don't think TCU was that formula, because I don't think Keontae Johnson played well either. He turned the ball over 7 times.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you're running into with Keontae right now is just turnovers. And when he's off, guys are coming around and picking his pocket when he's trying to put the ball on the deck and get it into the lane, which is what, for so much of this year, K-State's best offense has been, all right, if we're in trouble, just throw it to Key and let him kind of ISO on somebody and go to work. And that was not working at all. And it was getting very frustrating.
He spins out of that, and then the team is like expecting that spin where he's going to rub off that shoulder and maybe hit some kind of jumper, go inside, and they're bringing a second defender, timing that out perfectly and swiping that ball. So in a sense, I think they've kind of figured out that move a little bit. So he's going to have to adjust to their adjustment.
Were you guys surprised that they played Noel and Keontae 38 and 39 minutes in that game against TCU? Because I was a proponent of resting those guys when it got out of hand a little bit more.
I could see that. I just think those guys are too competitive. If you took them out, they'd be pissed, and I don't think it's in Jerome Tang's DNA. I understand the thinking. I don't know. Those guys want to win so bad. They just don't give up.
Well, here's the case I would make. One of the most, next to Tyke Green, I think the most encouraging thing I saw is that, I mean, dude, with like 10 minutes in the game, I don't know how many points Noel had and what that stat line looked, but it was bad. And I know you said, like, at the end, you look at the stat line, it looks a little bit more respectable. That's because down the stretch, he actually finally started to look like the guy that we had seen the rest of Big 12 play. So if that got his confidence back, that was the thing I liked about it. Like, at least just get his confidence.
Ended on a good note. Yep.
Yeah, like, just because he looked, I mean, I think I use this, I probably go to this example too many times, but he looked like the freaking, the Monstars had sucked his power out like it was Space Jam or something, and he didn't have anything there. And it was like, to at least get that back and have him look like the same dude at the end of the game. I was like, okay, take that into the week, take that into the Kansas game, not what you were for the first 3 quarters of that game. So that would be the only thing I'd say.
You love that example. You go to that well every single time.
I do, but it works. I mean, it works. And it looked that way for Key and Marquise.
You going to a Muggsy Bogues comp there for Marquise, John?
Ooh,
With the,
that's not bad. I think Muggsy Bogues was probably like 4 inches shorter than him, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's shorter. Yeah, I don't want to insult Marquise, although Muggsy Bogues was an NBA player, so I'm not sure I could be insulting Marquise by making a comp to an NBA guy. But yeah, look, I could go either way with it. I thought maybe they'd rest him a little bit more, but at the same time, I can understand why the coaching staff wouldn't want to send a message to the team that they're just mailing it in and not competing until the very end. And I mean, they made a run, and I think they cut it to 11 or 12 with 3 minutes left. So it wasn't completely out of reality. It was unlikely, but look, I've seen KU make comebacks in like a minute and a half, down 14 in games in Allen Fieldhouse. So anything can happen. I only bring it up because, like, as I look at Keontae's last 6 games, he's 3 of 19 from 3, and I just start to worry a little bit about legs. And I'm not saying that he's struggling a little bit more shooting the ball, because he still had tremendous games shooting from 2 in a lot of those games, but from 3, his numbers are coming back down to reality a little bit. And I think he's going to hit a hot stretch though soon. And maybe it'll be Tuesday night where that starts, where he hits a couple threes.
Yeah. I mean, he was shooting 50% from 3 there, right? Like almost halfway through the season.
Yeah.
So that was going to come down. It was going to come down, unfortunately. What do we make of, so some of the post-game comments, I think, really caught my attention. One, Marquise Noel, I believe, said he was like they were going for the home run play too much instead of kind of just taking what was there. And Jerome Tang made it a point to, I mean, and I don't really care what the real culprit is here. I think this is the right move. He made it a point to say, hey, like we as a coaching staff did not get these guys prepared well enough. Looking at it in hindsight, we certainly had a bad plan. Our guys don't turn it over this much. We clearly did not put them in the right position. Great leadership move for sure. But what do we think is really the culprit here as to what was going on?
Typically, when things like this happen, it's a little bit of both, right? I think if Marquise Noel is saying that he tried to do too much, coming from Marquise, who loves trying to do too much, it probably really means that he did. So I would tend to think that it was probably along those lines. But I think Jerome Tang has a sense of how they prepared too, and he's pretty transparent. So it's probably a little bit of both, but I think it's a good sign of your locker room and your team when there's no shortage of guys trying to take accountability for what happened after a setback of that magnitude. Crickets.
Cole, you have any thoughts there? Nothing?
No, I really don't.
Okay. All right. I mean, well, I think it is very interesting going into the Kansas game now, Derek, because of what you mentioned. You know that Bill Self is going to be ready with something. You just had this first time getting blown out, not playing very well at all at TCU. I'm very interested to see how the coaching staff does respond with this, because I think a lot of what we've seen from the actual coaching chops, which was a question mark coming into the season, like clearly Tang can recruit, clearly he can inspire, lead, get everybody on board, but what's the actual in-game coaching like? And I think a lot of it we've seen so far this year has been pretty good, down to, inbound plays that have been tremendous for a lot of this team. So we know he can X and O it up. He's earned some trust with me on that so far this year, but I will be fascinated to see what the plan is going to be to try and work around what happened against TCU with the challenge coming up in Kansas, who, not a perfect team, but certainly a great team and a national championship contender again this year. Yeah,
they certainly are. There's an argument to be made. I know people will probably roll their eyes a little bit, but I think Kansas might be a little bit better this year than they were last year. Last year's team was a good team. It wasn't like oozing with, amazing, overwhelming talent. They kind of got to the national championship game with smoke and mirrors before winning it all. I think this one just has more talent, even if it's not as deep. And they're still working out some kinks at the 5 position, which is probably not a bad thing for K-State. So it's not, that awful matchup that they saw against TCU or other teams. Because if there is one weaker link on KU, it is their interior. They're just not as stout there as they typically are. They don't have a David McCormick or Silvio de Sosa or Doak. So they don't have guys like that anymore. So, but I think if I had to guess what Kansas State's really been focusing on since that loss to TCU and up until that point when the ball tips against KU, it's probably a little bit of self-assessment, just watching their own games, the last two, and seeing how teams are starting to defend them. Because what happened is they jumped out to that crazy offensive explosion and spurt, and they were kind of getting everything that they wanted, but teams have now adjusted, and now they're defending them differently. They need to find out how differently, like what those wrinkles are by watching the tape. Like I know Jerome Tank said after the game, TCU helped off the right guys perfectly, and then they were taking away their certain driving lanes that have been available to K-State throughout most of the year. So they kind of took away everything that was almost like their go-to. So now K-State has to adjust to that and find a new go-to. So it'll be interesting, I think, because if I had to guess, and I know you guys talk about the junk defenses that Bill Self will toss out, more than anything, I think he's going to look at the Oklahoma State TCU tape and say, what did they do differently defensively than Texas, Baylor, and West Virginia because of what worked? Because, Oklahoma State and TCU both defended Kansas State much differently, and I think Bill Self's going to use that, at least for a little bit, for as long as it works. I think that'll probably be what we see. And now Kansas State has to adjust to that. Now they have to adjust.
I think this is really more of just a one-game rough patch for K-State, because when we talk about the Oklahoma State game, everybody has to remember that Oklahoma State was number 8 in the country, according to Ken Palm, in defensive efficiency, and number 1 in the Big 12. So I thought their length bothered K-State, and that had an impact on that game, and more so just Oklahoma State being a really good defensive team. And then I'd have to check where TCU is in the defensive efficiency metrics, but I think they're pretty solid too. I thought I had it in my notes, and I was trying to scour to find that real quick, but I couldn't find it. So I think KU's like 31st in defensive efficiency, I believe, which is still pretty darn good. And obviously I mentioned McCullough. I mean, he's a lockdown 6'6" defender coming in from Texas Tech that, gives him a lot of versatility and can defend any position on the floor, because he was asked to do that at Tech when he was there. So that's a weapon that they have. And what's interesting about KU, guys, is I don't know what to make of them. Obviously they're very talented and they're a top 5 team in America. Where I'm a little perplexed with them is, they've won 4 games now by 2-3 points in Big 12 play, and they're not running away with games in Allen Fieldhouse. So it's a little odd to watch them play such tight games in the Fieldhouse down the stretch. You look at the Oklahoma State game, down 15 at half in Lawrence, come back, win by 2. The Oklahoma game, obviously down by 10 with 5 minutes left, sneak away with that one. And then the Iowa State game, Iowa State's got a 1-point lead in the last minute of that game. And so they're not putting teams, they're not blowing teams out at home right now in Big 12 play. And in their 2 road games in Big 12 play, the 2 teams they played are a combined 0-10 in the Big 12. And so they're going to be walking into a hornet's nest against Kansas State. That's going to be the toughest atmosphere they play in this season. But sometimes KU feeds off of that, right? I mean, you think about that. That's what makes you a little nervous. Sometimes they look a little rattled, but also Bill Self teams can feed off that atmosphere. And when their backs are against the wall, you look at the Missouri game this year. Missouri is all jacked to play KU, and KU smokes them by nearly 30 points. So I don't know. It's hard to figure this KU team out, because, they're going to be very, very jacked up, fired up for this game. But they've also had moments in the history of this rivalry where you look at like 2015, Nigel Johnson scores 15 or 20 points on them. K-State finishes the year with a losing record, had lost 7 of their last 8 going into that game, and beats KU 70-63. Jacob Pullen year, scores 38 after K-State was in a real rut and didn't look like they were going to make the NCAA tournament, coming off a heartbreaking loss to Colorado, and K-State blows out number 1 ranked KU in Bramlage. So, and then last year, who would have thought K-State would be up 20 points in that game in Manhattan with that K-State team? So this rivalry is hard to figure out, but K-State for the most part plays KU close in Bramlage Coliseum. In fact, I think the last 8 matchups have been decided. The last 8 losses for K-State have been decided by an average of around 5 points, with 5 of them coming by 4 points or less. So it's going to be a close game, and I think it's going to be a pick 'em when the betting line comes out.
But those home games for KU, they're close. And we're used to KU having their way at home. I get that. I think this year is a little bit different, when every time you play a home game in the Big 12, it's probably against the top 30 teams. So I think that's more why it's close than anything. I mean, the Big 12, maybe not as top heavy or good at the top as it's been the last year or two, although we're seeing that unfold a little bit with KU and Texas. Might be pretty special in K-State for that matter. But depth-wise, it's just never been this good. So I think that is conducive to a lot of close games at home as well.
Well, and they're just, I mean, Kansas prohibitive favorite to win it again because they just, I watched a lot of that Iowa State game. You just knew how that was going to play out. You knew when Oklahoma was up by 10 with 5 minutes left, you knew how that was going to play out. They're not going to lose games at home. You're going to have to go absolutely knock the hell out of them if you're going to beat them in that building. I will say, Cole, you bring up a good point about the Mizzou atmosphere. Like, that was a pretty raucous, rowdy atmosphere, and Kansas went in and just predictably clocked them. Now, also, I think K-State's better than Missouri. I think that's becoming pretty clear to me at this point. Yeah. But we will not have Chris Kleiman in the student section holding a sign that says 5 level 1 violations, Cole. So I think don't worry too much about the atmosphere. We'll have good vibes. Oh, like, you're going to be in the student section holding the sign that says 5 level 1 violation?
Yeah, I got that.
DY is going to be the guy holding a stat sheet up in the face of a KU guy.
Man, I forgot about that.
Nate Bucati. I forgot about that.
DY can't do that because they moved the media, up in the seats. So, you're not going to be able to get
I was
right
on the front
face.
row. I could, but I think that's D. Scott Fritchen. So we need D. Scott to do it.
Okay. Somebody get that man a box score.
He'll have a box score. We just got to get him to, do something about it. Do that. Give him a little money there to.
Yeah. Let's take a break, come back, talk a little bit about the atmosphere and the build up to this game. There was some controversy about the atmosphere before the Oklahoma State game. And then I want to touch on an injury update as well when we come back. Okay, we're back here on 3 Mod. John, Derek, and Cole with you. As far as the atmosphere, I mean, this will be the best atmosphere for a K-State home game since the Cardi game, right? The Cardi windmill dunk.
Yeah, I think it might be better than that too. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be hard to get better than that. But look, we talked about that Keontae slam against Oklahoma State where the big crowd pop. I thought the crowd pop in Brainwich for that was louder than the Cardi one. I really did.
Well, I was not there for the most recent. I was there for Cardi, and that was insane. And that's about the loudest crowd pop that I've experienced I remember having to explain. KU Twitter, took umbrage to that sort of a comment. And I was like, well, look, I mean, it wasn't just the game. It was the fact that was the game that really put you in control of the Big 12 race. So at that time, you got to think about that Cardi moment. That had so much built into it. It's all right. Yes, you're beating Kansas here at the end of the game. You can release the nerves. 2, it was just this awesome play. I mean, you never get to see anybody throw down a windmill dunk like that. And 3, you knew, all right, now we're in the driver's seat for a Big 12 championship. That's what all of that meant. So that was a hell of a moment.
I think from a moment perspective, sorry about that. There was a lag on my internet there that caused me to jump over you. But from a moment perspective, I was at the Cardi. I was also for the Keontae moment, which still blew my mind. I think half the place just had their hands around their head like me that couldn't believe, because where I was sitting, I thought Marquise threw that ball into the out of bounds. And it just blows my mind out. A guy can go up and Naquan earlier this year against West Virginia, how these guys go up with one hand to catch the ball, find the rim and dunk it. I mean, in the way that they do it and cocking the ball back, these guys are such freak athletes across the board. But that was an incredible moment against Oklahoma State. It was very loud. I think still the Cardi moment was louder. Just there were more students in there for the Cardi moment. And from a moment perspective, that Cardi moment will compete with this KU game. But I think from a lead up perspective, before tip off, there's going to be a little bit of a different feel for this game, even a higher energy level for this game versus that game, even though K-State knew they had a chance at the Big 12. That was still early in the season as well. I think that was game 7 in Big 12 play when that occurred, or game 8. This is game 6 in Big 12 play. So we're still early in it. And that game was certainly meaningful, but I think there's going to be just a little bit of a different energy. Students just getting back. K-State ranked in the top 15. Jerome Tang, we've talked about it before. This staff, it's going to be nuts, man. And I'm looking forward to getting in there early. I think I'm gonna pull Brody out of school at 2:00 tomorrow. I'm just gonna be honest with him. Call the principal's office. We're going to the game. All right. I told him he missed the Big 12. He missed school for the Big 12 championship. I just pulled him out for that Friday. We're gonna live these moments up. and hopefully he doesn't hear too many bad things tomorrow night against the Jayhawks in the stands.
Well, yeah, I'm sitting right behind him. If you're utilizing your little season ticket mini pass or whatever, I don't know if you got the high roller seats, but you're gonna have to watch out. You're gonna have to watch out for me potentially on that front.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, look, you can say whatever you want tomorrow. It's a one night thing, and
I did hear Brody's father say a bad word after Ty Zentner hit the game-winning field goal in Arlington. So Brody was, he's right there.
Yeah, well, I wish you. Yeah, I can't believe you. I think that was somebody around us. That wasn't my voice. That was captured there. In fact, on my Snapchat 1 year flashback, John, yesterday I was watching it, and it was Brody talking about needing a new basketball coach and how he was no longer talking to Bruce Weber. So, anyways, I don't want to divert us off topic there. It's going to be not. What I worry about a little bit is just the atmosphere in K-State's players coming up a little uptight early on in that game, because that's going to be on another level that these guys have not played in before. I mean, I know Keontae Johnson played in the SEC and played at Kentucky. This is going to be a different atmosphere than what Kentucky is like. And, do they get overhyped and try to make too big of a play early on and cause a couple turnovers? We'll see. But DY, you mentioned it. I think the Oklahoma State crowd, just getting in front of a crowd, Jerome Tang, and then making such a big push for that, that was part of that process, is just to get these guys in front of bigger atmospheres.
Yeah, and I was glad you touched on that a little bit too. But some people got annoyed by that push, obviously trying to sell it out. That was because of what's going to happen on Tuesday night. I mean, Jerome Tang combs over every single little detail and takes every little thing into consideration. That's what makes him a special head coach already. And because of that, he, throughout his 19 years of assistant experience at Baylor and whatever else he's been to, he knows that when you play in front of that kind of atmosphere or environment and are not used to it, sometimes you can get uptight, or sometimes you can go so hard because you're juiced up and your adrenaline is running so high from that boost that you're receiving from the crowd that you completely wear yourself out of the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then you're basically jello the rest of the game and not as effective. So I think he was trying to mitigate that impact against Kansas, and that's why he wanted a full building for Oklahoma State. Just from reading in between the lines of what he said, in press conferences and stuff of that nature, I think that was kind of the mission. And also because you won a home field court advantage, I think the crowd helped against Oklahoma State and bought them a couple of calls if you ask me. So I think that's important. I also think Tuesday night's going to be a little bit different just because it is KU. Kansas State is a top 15 team. They are playing for first place. You beat Kansas, you're back tied for first place again in the Big 12. So there's a lot of implications to this contest. And I know they had this in 18-19 when you're going for a Big 12 championship as well, and you host Kansas, you win that game, it's rowdy. This has a chance to eclipse that if they maintain, if they make it a competitive game, right? This has a chance to eclipse that, but that's just because, in my opinion, the affection between coaching staff and fan base, program and fan base, is much different than it was back then.
And not only that, I'll tack on top of it, the other reason that it has extra juice now is just because it had been 3 years of bad basketball. And so people have just been starved for this, like starved to get back on board and have a reason to be this excited about it, start to build your weekends around the games. And so you have that too, like, because that's why, to me, I mean, honestly, it was like a cool night, even though 6 o'clock on a Tuesday, I could not get away to go to the game against Oklahoma State, bad as I wanted to. But it was like, seeing the building like that for the first time in a while, it's kind of like nostalgic for me. And you still have, it reminds me so much of the early Frank, peak Octagon of Doom. Not that it wasn't loud and rowdy during the Bruce Weber years when they were good, because it certainly was. But there's just like a different edge to it when it was, when I was in school, which was starting with the Michael Beasley year up through the end of Jacob Pullen and Curtis Kelly, because it was new. It was new. We hadn't experienced it. Everybody, you're just so hungry when you haven't experienced it like that. And I think everybody going through the last 3 years, that's added some extra edge to this, and why I really expect that for the crowd. I don't know if Jerome Tang's going to be able to stop the chant at this one. I'll put it that way.
No, I doubt it. And my last comment on just what we're expecting environment-wise, I'll be curious to see the reaction from the coaches and players, just because, look, I've been in crazy atmospheres and environments before. I covered, Kansas State's a third or fourth team that I covered, and I've seen some crazy basketball games. I've seen some crazy football games with loud environments, right? Um, there's not a whole lot that I haven't seen, but when I got into Bramlage Coliseum for the 2018-2019 Kansas State-Kansas game, and I expect this one could be, or Kansas State game, and I expect this one could be even more. That was quite literally probably the best crowd I've seen from start to finish that game. And nothing really comes close to it. It kind of just takes you aback. And it almost does that because, and I don't know that this is exactly what they want to go for, but this is what happens when these two teams play in Bramlage Coliseum. There's just so much hate. Like, I've never seen just so many angry, hateful people in one spot at one time. And it's so loud. It's so loud.
Well, what's going to be interesting for the players is when they're warming up 45 minutes, 50 minutes for tip, they're going to have a student section completely jam-packed, and they're not going to be used to that, right? And just the booze and everything that comes out of it, that's going to be unique for them that they haven't experienced. On the Kansas State side, to your point, DY, I've said this, and I feel like people probably scoff at this sometimes, but when Bramlage is full, when the juices are flowing, it's a big game. It's one of the loudest crowds in basketball, in college basketball across the country. I mean, Allen Fieldhouse is obviously nuts, but I would rank Bramlage Coliseum when it's full and there's a high level of energy in there that it can, the way it's built, the way it's structured, they can be one of the best atmospheres in college basketball. And full
Bramlage Coliseum when Kansas is in there is the best crowd I've seen. At least when the game is, when you're really locking horns, that's the best crowd that I've ever been a part of, football or basketball, in my time covering sports. So it'll be fun because I think you'll see and even for those coaches and players, I don't think they've quite seen anything quite like that. So it'll be interesting to see that aha moment, like, oh my gosh, because remember, hardly any of these guys except Curtis Kelly have ever seen a Kansas State atmosphere.
That's the thing. I'm looking forward to what their reactions are going to be like after the game or like at the time, maybe even before the game on social, because they haven't. I mean, they can sit there and say like, hey, we understand that it's going to be more, but you got to experience it. And it's because of what you said, Derek. I don't even know how particularly proud we should be of it, I guess, but it's because of the hate. I mean, it's like palpable. You can just you can cut the hate with a knife when you walk into that building on that night once a year. It's that thick in the air. So it's different. It's different.
Yeah, I mean, the best atmosphere moment in the rivalry that I can recall, obviously Michael Beasley game was nuts, but I think back to, and John, were you at the Poland game when he scored 38 on him, the Valentine's Day game?
I was. I almost didn't go because I was so pissed at that team by that point because they just had the Colorado thing right before that, and they were they were not in the tournament before that game, and that was the preseason top 5 year, and I was, John Kurtz at that age was about done with that team, and kind of begrudgingly went to the game to watch Poland score 38.
Yeah, I had a tough drive home from Boulder from covering that game at Colorado when the Magruder 3 was waved off at the buzzer and didn't give him much of a chance. In fact, I drove through the night after that game, got back at 8 a.m. Sunday because I was so pissed about the way that Colorado game went. And of course, I was covering the team, so I'm not supposed to be a biased observer, but we all know who we kidding. Nah, I was biased. Anyways, so that was a shocking game, obviously, the way they came out and dominated KU. But do you remember when I think K-State called a timeout, but Sandstorm was playing, and it was when K-State was up big, and he sent his guys back out on the court with still like 45 seconds left in the timeout, and it was just so loud, and you could see the KU players, like the Morris twins, just looking around at the crowd and like, what the hell is this?
Oh, I remember you can see like Tyrell Reed looking up into the stands like, am I about to die tonight? Like, is that
Yeah, I hope there's a moment like that on Tuesday night. I hope there's a moment where we could get a sandstorm, maybe. I don't know. I think it may return.
if they haven't brought it back from a non-KU game, they're not going to bring it back for the KU game.
Oh, it's going to be
Oh,
played this year.
no,
It's getting played this year. I just don't know if it'll be tomorrow.
No, you can't bring him back for the first time when KU's playing. He'll never play
That just
again.
leads to more of a build-up.
No, I think they'll do it. I think they'll do it if there's if the game goes. I mean, there's got to be a moment, but yeah, I think they would do it.
I don't think
okay.
so.
All right. Well, we shall see. We shall see. Cole, back to the point about like how the game actually goes. One thing I did want to throw in here. You said it's kind of hard to predict like how these are going to go because there have been random times. I mean, K-State has played some really close games at Allen Fieldhouse too, with teams that you would not have thought would have much of a chance. But my read on it kind of has been it didn't go as well, even like during the Frank years, I mean, because I think when Kansas perceives K-State as a bigger threat to win the game, it feels like that's when you get better performances from Kansas. I just feel like they've caught Kansas kind of sleepwalking sometimes here and not being as on edge. And that's why I worry, about this game. Like K-State has Kansas's full attention, I'm sure. On top of them, sometimes feeding off of that atmosphere because not only are they used to it every year in Bramlage, but they get it at Allen Fieldhouse every single game. They go out there and play in that sort of an environment. So
yeah, you're right. You're right, John. As we look at this now, the 07-08 game with Beasley, that was obviously a hyped up game, and KU was locked in on that, and K-State won. But as you look at it, like 2012-13, the year K-State won the Big 12, Bruce Weber's first year, K-State lost that game in Bramlage 59-55. I actually had charted the last 15 years of this matchup. You look at like 16-17, K-State only lost 74-71, but that wasn't a great K-State team. Typically when K-State is a top 15 type team, KU comes in very locked in. A couple of these upsets have occurred when K-State's not great, but you look at 18-19, K-State was ranked, KU was ranked, Big 12 championship, had amplifications, even though it was early in the year, K-State won that game by 7. But you're right. I think they've caught them off guard on occasion. And when, there's the type of buildup, I think KU does feed off of that in these situations. I don't know, man. You're right. It's going to be very interesting. I think the start to the game is going to be huge. I mean, I think K-State needs to get off to a good start and apply some game pressure to KU. So, and when you look at the actual game, Ken Palm projects it to be a 1-point margin. So it's essentially a coin flip game. I mean, we're talking, that's why I said earlier, the Vegas usually mimics similar to what Ken Palm projects in the advanced analytics. I expect it to be close to a pick 'em for this game, and who knows what the hell to expect. It's going to be great.
We hope. One more break. Let's come back and talk about the Gasson injury and where that stands coming up next. All right, so to close off this basketball pod, David Gasson was included in the little pregame hype video that we saw before the TCU game, which, I guess seems like a positive step in the right direction. Still has not actually played since the Radford game before Christmas, so it's been a while. How optimistic are we that we're going to see Gasson coming up this week?
I at least for the Kansas game, I would say he's questionable at best. No more crutches, no more boot, but he didn't even come out for warmups when we were in Fort Worth. So I think he's made progress. I'm not confident that it's enough progress to play against the Jayhawks on Tuesday night. As we sit here on Monday morning when we record this, we are going to speak to Coach Tang this afternoon. So I'm probably not going to get a great update on it if the past is any indication. But I would be surprised if David Gasson plays against Kansas. I think I would give him a chance on Saturday, though.
Yeah. I was driving, listening to the pregame radio show before the TCU game on Saturday, and Coach Tang had said that he was getting close and actually would be a game time decision for the TCU game. Now, I had already known, thanks to Derek, when he said that, and that's pre-recorded earlier in the day, that he wasn't going to give it a go against TCU. But it does sound like it's optimistic, maybe a return within the next week. And, then you gotta start phasing him back in, right? He's going to play probably 7-8 minutes early on as he gets back into shape and gets his conditioning up and knocks the rust off. But I think it's probably a little unfair to throw him out there for his first game back in a month against KU. Not maybe at quite 100%. So Although maybe that atmosphere just makes your ankle feel numb and you feel great out there.
But that next morning would hurt like a
Yeah, I think you want him for the long haul, right? I mean, K-State has goals just beyond this game, and so you want to make sure that he doesn't re-aggravate something by rushing him back, because you've still got 12 Big 12 games after this, and then the Big 12 tournament, and hopefully the NCAA tournament. And so if it means sitting him another game or two to make sure that he's good to go for the rest of the season, you need that extra body. This is a guy that was giving you 8 points and 5 rebounds a game, and is a big defensive rotational guy because he can guard multiple positions and go out on the perimeter as well. I think it's important to make sure that he's at 100%. I know the staff will be very careful with that and make sure he's good to go. So, but yeah, this is a big week for K-State, guys. I mean, if you look at the schedule, if you can beat KU, you got a good shot at a 2-0 week and getting off to 6-1 in Big 12 play. And so I look at it like this: you got Florida the next Saturday. You got a tough road game. I think it's at Iowa State next week. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but if there's any way they could go 3-1 over the next 4 games, they're sitting in tremendous shape. And if they can beat KU, I think it's very likely they get to a 3-1 record over the next 4 games.
Could be tough. I mean, Texas Tech looked a lot better on Saturday against Texas. Now that they have AMAC back in the lineup now. So that game will be tough. That game will be tough on Saturday. I don't expect Tech to have thrown in the towel. But
I will say Kansas State, Texas Tech's been great team the last 5 years, right? Final Four, national championship run, Big 12 championships. But they play Texas Tech well at home. I know now it's a completely different regime, different roster, but Kansas State's giving Texas Tech fits at home.
You're right. Won that game last year.
Yeah, you guys are right. And I don't want to chalk Texas Tech up as an automatic gimme because, like you said, they fought Texas tooth and nail to the very end and led that game by double figures at one point in Austin. And I do think Tech still has some fight in them. We'll see what happens in their next game. But if they drop to 0-6 in Big 12 play, where does that leave them mentally? I don't know. But I think they do. They're still a good defensive team. They're not as great as they used to be over the last several years, but they still have some talent. I mean, Harmon's a really good player. Amik being back, like you guys mentioned, just in time for K-State, how lovely that is. So that'll be interesting. It's also a tough spot. I mean, K-State's going to be coming off the heels of the KU game. Win or lose against KU, it's going to be a letdown type spot for the K-State game Saturday, but it's sold out for the Tech game as well. And you just hope everybody comes. The Chiefs game being at 3:30 just after that game ends, could have an impact on some folks. But I think for the most part, it'll be a packed house, and hopefully the energy in the building lifts K-State to a victory.
I mean, it's Chiefs-Jags, people. Come on.
Go to Tanner's as soon as the game leaves or ends.
Or just check the score later. It'll be fine. It's Chiefs-Jags. Jags.
Wow.
Be okay.
Wow.
Yeah. I said it, Cole.
Right.
I said it. And Trevor Lawrence is so cool because he goes into a Waffle House after the game. Okay. Awesome. Mr. Red.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not very worried about the Jaguars game. And look, it honestly sounds like a fun Saturday for me. You just go, you go straight from basketball to Aggieville and watch football. That sounds like a blast.
Yep. I'm in.
BYU in?
Oh, I'll be working.
Oh.
Well, I mean,
They'll meet us the second half.
For the entire game? Like, come on.
I can probably meet you for the second half if you give me a spot at Tanner's.
Okay, there we go. Now that's not a sponsor could be. Our sponsor is Holiday Distillery, 360 Vodka, Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond Bourbon. Make sure that you go stock up. Get ready for a big week of basketball this week, whether it is the Tech game on Saturday or the Kansas game on Tuesday night. Make sure that you are stocked up and ready to go. We are going to have a football pod coming out shortly to get you updated on Treshawn Ward, everything that's going on with K-State football. But for now, we bid you adieu here from Threemaw. Enjoy the Kansas game, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.